Almost everything the left does only makes sense when you understand that there are broadly two classes of people with wholly different rules: the people and the enemies of the people, who are not considered valid people. This logic underlies all of their thinking. The people are those who support leftist theory and practice, or who might still be trained to do so. The enemies of the people are those who resist or reject leftism, have something leftists don't want them to have, break from leftism, or represent any opposing faction. I'll just read one or two more. Nothing the people do, so long as it is consistent with advancing leftism, is wrong. In fact, it's necessary and right. Violence, hate, and malice are, quote, resistance. They are taught these are necessary moral goods and trained to believe it. Actions don't matter. Context does. Boy, this is relevant to so many things. Let me just get one more tweet out. Nothing the enemies of the people do can be right. Even if it is, it's for the wrong reasons. So wrong. Everything they do is bad and must be punished. The only thing they can do is to confess over and over and start their journey to becoming a leftist too. I think of so many things. I think of anti-hate activists now being fountains of anti-Semitic hate. I think of the recently revealed barbaric rape crimes committed by Hamas, and I see the woke feminists providing context for why it's justifiable. Everything you said there is so useful. Go ahead and tell me more about the two classes of people in the revolution.
Well, I got this idea from the source, really, from Mao Zedong, from reading and studying the original CCP dictator, and he used this structure relentlessly. He separated the people in China into those two categories. There were the people, and he says in this speech he gave in 1957 that who counts as the people, we have to understand that, he said, changes during time, during different contexts. So during the war with the Japanese, the people were the people who supported the war against the Japanese, and the enemies of the people were Japanese sympathizers. Then he says, when we were having this struggle internal to the party, the people who supported the direction the party was going to take, those were the people, and the people who were against that, those were the enemies of the people. Then he says that in the struggle with the nationalists, which was called the Kuomintang in China, the people who supported the CCP were the people, and the people who supported the Kuomintang were the enemies of the people. If you supported the nationalists, you were the enemy. And then he said, finally, and this was in 1957, at this stage, the people are the people who support the building of socialism, and everyone who is against the building of socialism are the enemies of the people. And so you see what this is this separating of the population into those who support the regime's cause, get to be treated as people. He said that they are citizens, that they have free speech, they have all these other privileges and rights. Whereas on the other hand, the enemies of the people receive the dictatorship of the people. And what they means by that, he says that they will have their freedom of speech, their right to vote taken away from them for a time. They will be, treated differently as enemies of the people. And what he taught relentlessly across that line of division was that the people should hate the enemies of the people. The enemies of the people are what are keeping us from succeeding in our socialist goals or our socialist country. And so you should hate them. We would be successful if only we could stop the enemies of the people. And so that's the basic structure. And you see this happen again and again and again in all these movements in the West, just repeatedly. Like you said, it touches on so many different things.
I'm 51, so when I went to university, a lot of this wokeness had not yet calcified. And one of my fondest memories is that there were debates, student debates. And in Canada in the 90s, at my university, there were four main political parties. And all the time, all four parties would show up to a debate, the student presidents of those clubs, and there would be 100 or sometimes hundreds of people gathered, and participating in the debate was considered your proof of being, an active, valid citizen worth listening to. And the idea that you hated the other person or that you would marginalize them or cancel them, that was not widespread back there. You debated them, you laughed at them, you mocked them, you tried to undermine them. But this, I will not appear on the stage with you, you are the enemy, I swear that wasn't around when I was, and the idea of, censoring thoughts which is part of this hatred. You must destroy the enemy. Anything you do against them is excused and justified by the context. And that's what we saw after the October 7th pogrom in southern Israel. The most barbaric Stone Age torture ever captured on film. It was like the Holocaust Museum came to life in full color. And the reaction by the woke West in universities from the fancy people, from the human rights people, was to contextualize this. And sure, they may have been children and women, but they were colonists or, I mean, I saw that in action. I think, I don't know, I'm lacing together a bunch of things here, but do I understand it right? That basically any violence, including murder, including rape, is justified if it's an oppressor. That's the other. You could sum up other people in one word: oppressor. So you can do anything to the oppressor. Anything is justified to the oppressor. Is that right?
Yeah, their belief is that the oppressor, which is to say the avatars of Western civilization or members of Western civilization or capitalists or white people or straight people or men, it depends on whatever faction you want, or in this case, settler colonialists. Those people that represent that side are constantly, by their very existence and by their activity, always doing violence to those that they oppress. Oppression is a form of violence. And so anything you do in response is actually a form of resisting that violence. You are completely justified. If you go back to he's from Martinique, but he's usually identified as a French psychoanalyst who's considered the father of post-colonial theory, where a lot of this specific branch of the thinking comes from. His name was Frantz Fanon, and he wrote in the 50s and the early 60s. He wrote a book in 1961 that was very famous called The Wretched of the Earth. It has a very, very famous preface written by Jean-Paul Sartre, which is, in my opinion, the letter asking Europe to commit suicide to atone for its sin of colonialism. But he says in the first sentence of the book, no matter what you want to call it, he says decolonization, the process of undoing this colonial violence, is always itself a violent process. It is necessarily violent. It is an act of actually rebirth of the man who has been colonized, who's no longer a man because he's now been colonized by colonial oppression. He's reduced to something like an animal. It's the rebirth of that man as a man to murder his colonizer. And this is the logic. And the woke left across the board endorses this logic. This is why when you see people by the millions literally colonizing and settling in, say, Ireland, and the Irish people getting upset, it's the Irish people who are the ones who are wrong, because they represent that same Western hegemonic, whether it's white or capitalist or whatever framing you want to throw on it. They represent this. They represent the colonists, the colonialism. They represent the spreading of Western hegemony and the maintenance of Western hegemony. And so anything is justified against them, whether it's violence, whether it's taking the property that they live in, whether it's filling their country and bankrupting it. All of these things are acts of resistance against a intrinsically violent enemy. And that's ultimately the logic. But underneath that is, there are the good guys that are the people, and they are citizens. And there are the bad guys who are the enemies of the people, who must be destroyed, which is the logic of Maoism.